Prerana Youth Festival. This is the 175th Youth Festival in progress. Uh, Today is a very special day, India's Independence Day, 15th of August. And we decided today to choose this particular day to have a very, very special discussion. As you all know, the topic is East meets West, the role of youth in independent India. And we have chosen a very, very special speaker for today. And the speaker is His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. Let us welcome Chaitanya Charan Prabhu to our Prerana festival by 3 times loudly chanting Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. A brief introduction of Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, a very brief introduction. Many of you already know him, you have heard him so many times. Also visited his wonderful website, thespiritualscientist.com. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu has been a monk for last 25 years and practicing Krishna consciousness and spreading Krishna consciousness through wonderful values and wisdoms through his internet preaching. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu already has authored more than 25-30 books. In fact, he has given hundreds of talks in various organizations, institutes, and many big conferences. He has, to his name, many conferences, like he has presented in World Peace Conference, in UNESCO, and also given lectures in Stanford and in Google, Intel, etc. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is well known for his wonderful books on bringing the wisdom of Krishna consciousness, and he has given more than 3,000 to 4,000 lectures on practical wisdom of Bhagavad Gita in day-to-day life. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is a well-known author, well-known speaker, and travels all over the world. He is, I was told, he gives around 400 lectures every year and traveling to many countries. So we have with us Chaitanya Charan Prabhu once again. Every year we bring him for Prerana Festival. Thank you, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, for coming to grace our Prerana Festival. And here is Chaitanya Charan Prabhu for all of you. The topic is East meets West, the role of youth in independent India. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So thank all of you for coming today for this Prerana festival on the occasion of Independence Day. And we'll today discuss about how India and Indians specifically can bring together the East and the West for the best for the world. So, East meets West, the role of youth in independent India. For the last, slide 2 now. So, the last several, maybe 5-6 years, I have been traveling extensively across the world and sharing India's spiritual wisdom. In fact, I spent almost 8 to 9 months outside India, about 5-6 months in America and 3-4 months in other parts of the world, Australia, New Zealand, England and other places. So I came across a striking irony in what I found in my interactions with people across the world and in the perceptions of India across the world, through the media, through the culture, through the televisions and other things. So worldwide, Indians are respected more than India. What do I mean by this? Whichever country I have gone to, Indians are among the most respected immigrants. Indians are educated, they're hardworking, law-abiding, don't get into violence, pay their taxes, and in that sense, Indians are seen as assets, valuable assets in whichever part of the world they go to. Of course, sometimes they are so valuable that it sometimes felt that Indians may take jobs away from the local people. But then Indians do work hard and they do their jobs well. In fact, in America, Indians and Chinese are considered the largest and the wealthiest minorities. So while Indians are respected for their professionalism, for their ethos, somehow India is not respected that much. India is often seen as the land of, in the past it was seen as the land of snake charmers. Unfortunately, there is that perception still, not very prominent. But India is not seen positively. India is seen as the land of the caste system. India is seen as the land of so many other negative things like dowry and other things like that. So the portrayal of India is of a primitive country trapped in, say, casteism, sectarianism, and other kinds of outdated beliefs. So I have tried to explore and understand why this is so. Why is India not respected as much as Indians? So that is what we will try to discuss today. And one reason for this irony is that Indians don't understand India really very well, and they can't make India understandable to others. We are often proud in a positive sense usually, sometimes in a negative sense, proud of our nation, proud of our national heritage, but often we are not very good at explaining it to others, because many times we have not taken the time to understand it ourselves. And of course, this is the next slide. So as you see, India is very complicated. In fact, visitors to India are sometimes overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the country, because there are so many cultures within India, there is so much diversity, there is so much incredible level of complexity within India. So when we are talking about India, what exactly are we talking about? That is something which is itself complex. So today we will talk about how we can understand India and how we can make India understandable. So before that, given the complexity of India, what makes India India? So we could say that there are many things special about India. There are so many languages being spoken, so much diversity. But what India can offer to the world distinctively, even uniquely, is that India is still a living expression of an ancient culture. Most other ancient civilizations are no longer present. The Egyptian civilization, the Aztec civilization, the Mayan civilization, these are all just relics of the history that might fascinate us when we read about it today, but it doesn't manifest itself today at all. So, and it's not just India is a living ancient culture, but also Indian culture is based on certain principles. They are called as Sanatan Dharma. So India has many different religious expressions, but India's distinctive offering could be its Sanatan Dharma. Now Dharma has many different meanings. We could broadly talk about Dharma as principles for living. Dharma gives us guidelines of how we can live in harmony with ourselves, how we can live in harmony with nature, how we can live in harmony with ultimate reality. So Dharma in that sense is principles of living, and Sanatan means universal, eternal, imperishable, trans-sectarian. So, what India can offer to the world distinctively, this is what makes India India in its unique defining senses, its roots in Sanatana Dharma, its universalist ethos that can provide principles for living for people independent of what their beliefs may be, what their practices may be, what their particular orientations may be. So Sanatana Dharma in that sense underlies and unifies the diversity that is present in India. So now what is the Sanatana Dharma? And how can we understand it? How can we share it with others? So in India, one of the most coveted professions is the IAS. Now IAS traditionally means Indian Administrative Services. I'll talk today how all of you can become IAS, can use IAS as a means for channeling the independence that we have. We're talking about the Independence Day celebration, and in this Independence Day celebration, how can we use our independence to do three things? So I refers to investigate. It refers to what questions we ask about ourselves, about our culture, about our tradition, about dharma. So if we have freedom, freedom really doesn't mean much unless we have the freedom to ask questions. And asking questions is not of much use unless we ask the questions that are worth asking, unless we ask the right questions, and then we can get the right answers. For learning, asking the right questions is more important than getting the right answers. Because if we are not asked the right questions, even if we have the right answers, we won't value them much. So investigate, ask questions about what our tradition and our culture is all about. Then aspire. Nowadays people talk about aspirational India. So aspire. What we desire in our daily lives. We'll discuss how we can use our independence to broaden our understandings of what we should investigate, what we can aspire for, and lastly, what we can seek. Now seek is often associated with the word seeker. So I am using seek in a more spiritual sense. What we look for to find ultimate meaning in life. So this will be the body of the class. We'll look at investigate, aspire, and seek. And if we can use our independence to do these things in a way that breaks free from various shackles that we might have inherited, then we can put our independence to great use for ourselves, for our nation, and for the world. So let's see how. So investigate. So now how do we understand India? By using IAS, by becoming IAS, by becoming inquirers, by being aspirers, by becoming seekers. So what do we investigate? So broadly we could say, investigate your culture, don't reject your culture. There is a tendency in today's world it's fashionable to reject the traditional as old-fashioned. And quite often because of this, we think that we are cool, we are modern, we are progressive to the extent we look down upon the things from the past. And yes, not everything from the past is good. There are many things within the tradition that could be just superstitions, that could be unhealthy. And unfortunately, these are portrayed quite aggressively in the media. And rather than denying the existence of these, we need to investigate, okay, if something is being practiced, why was it being practiced? Oh, this is terrible, just give it up. Okay, instead of just doing that, just try to find out why was it being practiced and then investigate. So use your intelligence to investigate the culture. And then we'll discuss about the remaining things, what we do with A and what we do with S. Aspire for social influence, not just individual excellence. And seek spiritual India, not just ritual India. So I'll come to these two later, but let's move forward with investigate. Now here's an example of what happens when there is lack of investigation. So when I was studying in college about 20-25 years ago. At that time, I was in a social circle where many of us came from good cultured families, and hardly any of us would eat meat. But at that time there was a lot of idea that to become modern, to become cool, you should start eating meat. And then recently I met one of my friends who has now become a faculty, he's become a research scientist in NASA. And so he went to in the name of becoming modern, he started adopting eating non-vegetarian food. And that's what he went to America, he settled down, he had his family, he has kids. And they used to eat non-vegetarian food. And then his kid now is going to school and college, and he has stopped eating meat. Why? Because while Indians believe that it's cool to eat meat, in the West, actually becoming meat free is what is cool. And it's not just cool because it's fashionable, it's cool because it's healthier. It's healthier for our own bodies, it's healthier for our environment, because meat causes a huge carbon footprint. So becoming vegan or vegetarian is cool. When I go for any spiritual programs and I go to yoga studios and give talks, quite often when the food is announced, at that time they announce that this is a vegan food. So if any of you prefer, if you are vegans, then take this and don't take these items. So even in Western society, people are consciously turning toward vegetarianism. So this was a part of our culture, and we somehow, even now many times in movies it is said that people eat meat and then others look down on them, others look down on them, are portrayed as so old fashioned. But actually what was given in our tradition was not just what was a part of our culture, at least a major part of our culture, say having particular food choices, that has been found to be healthy, and it has also become trendy. So rather than uncritically adopting certain norms which are portrayed as modern, and for that rejecting something which comes from the culture, investigate. Okay, if a particular dietary choice was recommended, why is that? Is it rational? It may be traditional, but it may not just be traditional, it may be rational. So that's one good example of investigating. Now, we could go to the other extreme and reject all authority, reject all traditional sources of wisdom. And in fact, nowadays, even today, we think that we want to become modern. But in much of the Western world, modern is considered ancient, modern is considered old-fashioned. Because the West has gone beyond modernity to what they call as postmodernism. The modernity was based largely on rationality. Postmodernism holds that everything is relative. There is no real authority. Now, what your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. And postmodernism sees every authority as simply a tool for gaining power, and that way it rejects all authority. But then, what does it lead to? It leads to nihilistic chaos. Nihilism is the idea that there is no authority at all traditions should be rejected, and it leads to chaos. And there can be some very alarming examples of this kind of nihilistic chaos. So I was in Canada a few months, maybe a year ago, and I was told there about this case. This is not among Indians, this is among a Canadian family, that there is a trend increasingly in the West about changing one's gender. It's called transgender. Now there might be a few people who feel uncomfortable with their body. Everybody to some extent feels uncomfortable with their body, because who has the perfect body? The complexion, the slimness, the height, the build. Nobody feels perfectly satisfied with their body. But some people feel existentially dissatisfied with their bodies. And from a spiritual perspective of the Bhagavad Gita, we understand this might come from a previous life, where say somebody was a female in their previous life and now they have become male, but somehow their body has a, like, we might travel across one country to another country and have jet lag, so they might have a transmigration lag, and that's why they identify with the previous body. So they are in a male body now, but they identify with a female body, or conversely, they're in a female body now, they identify with a male body. Now there are a small number of people like that who might have that is called gender dysphoria. But unfortunately, there is a rejection of authority. Now everybody goes through, in that, most people, not everybody, many people may go through a phase when they do some kind of cross dressing. So boys may dress as girls, girls may dress as boys. So this happened to this boy. He dressed as a girl, and this boy's parents were separated. So when he was with his mother, she saw that he likes to cross dress, and she says, actually my boy is a girl. So then there is a whole gender transplant surgery that is to be done, and lots of elaborate processes are there, and it's become a matter of trend. So they say hold that the gender idea of that there are two genders, this is a social construct, this is authority, this is a imposition by society on us, and we reject it. So I am giving this as an example of where rejection of authority can take us. So then what happened was, the mother said that we need to change the gender of this person, and the father said no. But then the mother insisted, and the mother got her way, and then after that the father was told, you have to refer to your child by his, or now her, new gender, and the father refused. You are still a boy, you are not a girl. And because of that the father was accused and charged of child abuse. You are causing psychological trauma to the child by refusing to accept her identity, whatever. And eventually the father was fined, not just a nominal amount, $35,000. That's an astronomical amount. So parents have lost authority on children. Not all, but a significant amount of authority on children. And when the whole idea is, if we start rejecting authority, then this is what I've been told, I reject it. This is what I've been told, I reject it. Well, in many ways, rejection of authority leaves us with very little authority, just the authority of our own feelings, which are not very reliable. Many of these kids who do, especially if they go to transgender surgery, then they grow older, they come into they go by their teens and the adults, and they realize that maybe I shouldn't have done this. These are complicated issues and there are no simple solutions, but I am giving this as a graphic example of how rejection of authority can cause complete chaos in society. And while the West is very progressive in terms of technological facilitation of daily life, but in terms of the kind of decisions that are based on the values of living, there is a lot of chaos. So this is not necessary to say that Western civilization is bad. Even in the West there has been spirituality, there has been culture, but the whole idea of rejecting authority, rejecting anything traditional as bad. By authority I am referring here to traditional authority, rejecting traditional culture as bad. So the idea is that the traditional family structure where husband, wife, children live together, that's bad. Many times in today's world, if a woman voluntarily chooses that she is more satisfied living as a homemaker, as a mother, as one who takes care of her family, she's frowned upon. You are submitting to the patriarchy, and why don't you have your own position in life? Well, what if the woman is happier being a mother, being a caregiver? No, you are submitting to the patriarchy, and the big result of this is that quite often children grow up without proper care. If both the parents are pressured into pursuing careers, and then it leads to problems in society. So I'm not making value judgments of what is good or what is bad, because this may vary significantly across cultures, but I'm talking about the principle of rejection of authority can lead to chaos. And some of you, if you are in touch with politics, now there is a word called post-truth. That means truth is also a relative construct. So now what has happened is, Indians who are outside India also especially face this predicament that there's an acronym used for describing Indians. It's called ABCD. ABCD is what? American born confused Deshis. So they live in two worlds. The Western culture, this is for America, this is also for UK, this is also for Australia, wherever in the Western world Indians go. And to some extent, as this Western culture is coming here to India, we'll find this happening in India also. So American born confused Deshis. Why confused? Because who am I? Even if it's not in the philosophical sense, even in an existential sense, who am I? Am I Indian? Am I American? So often Indians in the West are like coconuts. Coconuts in the sense that especially this refers to Indians who are born in America, second generation or third generation Indians. Their parents immigrated over there. So they are brown externally and white internally, like a coconut. Now, so they have a brown skin, and it's not just skin. But somehow internally they think that, oh, the Western way is the better way of living. And then they just can't. They come from a different family background, they come from a different culture background, then there's an existential crisis. And it's important to understand the role that our culture plays in forming our identity, forming our worldview, forming our mode of living. Our culture is like our blood. It is because the blood is flowing that we are functioning. But we hardly ever think about the blood. The only time we start worrying about the blood is when we start losing it. When we start losing it. So similarly, we start worrying about our culture when we start losing it, and even a small bleeding where sometimes we have a wound which we don't notice. Then the bleeding is going on, but we don't notice the bleeding. But after some time, if we start feeling weakness, we start feeling injury, then, hey, what happened? I lost a lot of blood. So quite often Indians, when they go to America initially, they want to explore the American way of life. Hey, let me enjoy. But after some time, especially when they become parents, they have family and they become parents, then when it comes to raising their children, they realize, I don't want my children to be raised the way American kids are raised. Unfortunately, in America, drug usage is a national emergency, and so many people are succumbing to that. And drugs usage is one of the many ways in which people get misled. So that is the time when they start exploring. Hey, I want our culture to be passed on to our next generation. And sometimes these Indians, often they start exploring what is India. And then they discover not just the cultural India, but through the cultural, the spiritual India. And they sometimes become more Indians than Indians who are in India also. So there are non-resident Indians and there are non-Indian residents, NRI or NIR. Non-Indian residents means people may be residing in India, but all their desires, all their aspirations, their whole worldview is Western, because there's so much enamorment with the West. But there are many values which are vital, and in the West, unfortunately, these values are not preserved. So now to learn about culture, so I was addressing some kids, maybe around 10 years old, and these were just general Hindu kids. So at a temple I had gone, and I spoke about Narasimha, and I asked them, how many of you know about Narasimha Dev? And one of them raised hands. He said, I know Narasimha Rao. They know Narasimha Rao, they don't know Narasimha Dev. And I asked their parents afterwards, so if you want to tell Indians, tell your kids about Indian culture. He says, what all resources do you have? They said, the biggest resource we have is Bollywood. I would say appalled. Not because I am against Bollywood per se. No, it's entertainment, and entertainment has its place in every society. But often Bollywood doesn't really represent Indian culture. It often represents the sensualized, materialistic extremes of Indian culture. More than reflecting Indian culture, often Bollywood directs Indian culture. People want to become what Bollywood stars do and show, or what is shown in Bollywood. So that's not a very good representation of what makes India India. So we all need to investigate to understand what our tradition is. So here I have a pendulum to illustrate this point. What could be our attitude toward a culture? There could be authoritarian attitude, that this is our culture, you must do it, don't ask any questions. Now that is not very healthy. That's one extreme of the pendulum. And we may recoil and go to the other extreme, that is anti-authority. This I reject. So this is what was told to me, I reject it. But we can become authoritative. Authoritative means not authoritarian. Authoritative means we learn so much that we become an authority in the subject. Okay, if I am doing something, I want to know why I do it. And I have rational reasons. I have sensible reasons why I do this. So when we investigate our culture, we ask questions. Okay, this is what was done. Why is it done like this? By that, each one of us can actually become authorities ourselves. Not that we want to become big authorities known across the world, but at least we become authorities for what we are doing, for our choices in life. We may reject the traditional culture and say this is old fashioned, but sometimes we may just get swept away by the contemporary fashion trends, and then we are letting the fashion industry today dictate to us our choices. Do we want that? British writer Oscar Wilde said that fashion is a form of ugliness so intolerable that we want to change it every 6 months. So do we want our lives to be just dictated by just fleeting fashions and time limited trends? No, let's learn about what are the values and principles for living, see what aspects of our culture manifest them, and apply them in our lives. So then we can become authorities. So the first point was about how do we understand India so that we can make it understandable to others, that we investigate. So then let's go to the second point now. This is aspire for social influence, not just individual excellence. So you remember I started this class by focusing on the irony. Why is it that Indians are respected but India isn't so much in the world? So one reason for this is that Indians have focused on individual excellence, not so much on social influence. That means, say, Indians go into fields like engineering or medicine and excel in those. Now when we excel in those, this is good, and by this we gain individual excellence. That means we earn a lot of money, we get some good positions, and get our family well situated. So Indians are, as I mentioned earlier, in the West also among the wealthiest minorities. But these are not necessarily the professions that bring about social influence. They don't influence the way society does things or perceives things. So journalism, law, academia, especially academic activism, and politics, these are a few areas where even the entertainment industry, not just the entertainment, but the part of the entertainment that shapes public opinions. So Indians are not very much present in the fields which mold people's opinions. So the social influence of Indians is far lesser than the individual excellence that they manifest. So we can contrast this with, say, for example, the Jews. Now Jews, they are a very small community and yet their influence is huge. That is, now Jews are intelligent, they excel in their fields, but often they excel in the fields where there is significant social influence. So now why is it that Indians focus more on individual excellence rather than social influence, or what do we mean by this? That in general, Indians seek to excel through the system, not by changing the system. So whatever the system, will find out how I can work through the system and succeed. So for example, the same Indian who is in America will never throw anything out of the car, because that's a culpable crime over there. But sometimes the same Indians who come to India, they may throw things outside, or other Indians who are habituated to throwing things outside from the car, or to doing trash or doing litter or anything like that. When they go to America, they will never do that. But when they come back to India, they will start doing it. Because whatever is required to excel through the system, one does that, we do that. But apart from that, forget it. Now why is it that we don't change the system? Not that, now again, this is not an absolute statement. There are many Indians who are reformers, there are some who are even revolutionaries, but I am talking about a broad social characteristic, not any particular individual's characteristic. So we could say that, so we have broad concerns, but you could say they are limited broad concerns. That means we care about the smaller units that we belong to, the smaller wholes. Say for example, we'll care about our family members, we'll care about immediate relatives, but we won't care about the bigger wholes that we belong to. We don't care, say for example, what happens to our culture, what happens to our tradition, and how people perceive it, who is attacking it. These things, we just are a little apathetic toward it. And that's why Indians have not taken responsibility for how they are perceived in the broader culture. This applies actually to not just to the West, but even in India, see how India's traditional culture is perceived. Often people don't take responsibility for reshaping those perceptions. So one reason for this is a colonial hangover. For almost a millennia, Indians have lived under foreign rule, and during this time there was not much that the average Indian could do to change the broader society. So whichever party, which group was ruling, whether it was different kinds of Islamic invaders, there could be Arabs, there could be Turks, there Mughals, whatever, or there could be the British colonialists. In some part it was Britain, some part it was Portuguese, but whatever it was, there didn't seem much before the independence movement really to gain steam that Indians could do to change it. So the idea was that don't bother about the larger society and try to change it. Focus on changing and improving your own lives. So Indians grew even within the British system, and Indians rose within the British government system and tried to rise to some higher levels in the what was called the ICS over there, civil services, Indian civil services. So that colonial hangover has been carried over in post-independent India, where we focus more on, okay, if the system is corrupt, then I will do whatever is required to rise through the corrupt system. I won't bother about changing the system. And this has applied especially in the form of intellectual apathy. No matter how our culture or tradition is portrayed, misrepresented, as long as I can do what I want to do, I come to my home and I do my puja, I can go out and earn a job and earn money, have a job and earn money. We don't care sometimes about how we are portrayed. Now, how people portray the things that are sacred to us is important for us actually. And if we don't take the responsibility to portray it properly, then others are going to portray it improperly. And often they might do it improperly, sometimes because they are malicious, and sometimes because they are ignorant. So for example, one common portrayal in America is that Indians in India, it's a place of constant religious riots, and Hindus and Muslims are at each other's throats. Now, and this was a perception I had so often. I was in Connecticut, and Pakistani Muslim politician who had become a senator in the Connecticut Senate. He had come to meet, he comes sometimes for our Rath Yatra festival, and he had come to meet me. So he had this perception that Indians and Muslims, Hindus and Muslims are constantly at the throat of each other. Well, this is hardly true. There have been, of course, riots, no doubt, but if you look at it comparatively speaking, the number of people, leave aside the partition, that was traumatic, but after that, the number of people who have died because of religious riots in India since independence is barely 1% of the number of people who are killed in America because of gun violence. America, as many of you might know, has relative freedom for anybody to acquire guns. And people get angry, and for various reasons people kill each other using the guns. So they call it gun violence. So gun violence in America is far, far more than religious violence in India. But somehow India is portrayed as the land where there is so much religious violence. And the world is quite widely aware of Islamic extremism, primarily because of 9/11 and other such attacks. But somehow Hindus are lumped into the same thing. Yes, Muslims are violent and Hindus are also violent. And there was a New York Times article which portrayed that the Hindu propensity for violence comes because of the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is a book of violence. Now, when I read that article, it was by a person who was supposed to be an Indian scholar. And I read the article, and the arguments were so pathetic that any person who has even read the Bhagavad Gita objectively once, they will see that this doesn't have any substance to it. Oh, how does it not have substance? That if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, were a book of violence, normally how do you incite people to violence? There is what is called a hate speech, and those people are so terrible. And then, they have done all these these things to us, and therefore we should destroy them. That's basically calls for violence. Now the Bhagavad Gita, although it calls Arjuna for war, there is absolutely no hate speech in the Bhagavad Gita. There is no calling out, Arjuna is fighting against the Kauravas, but the Kauravas are not mentioned much in the Bhagavad Gita at all. And there is absolutely no reminder of the atrocities that the Kauravas had done against the Pandavas. Oh, they did all this A, B, C, D. If Krishna had wanted Arjuna just to fight, he could have reminded Arjuna, remember how Draupadi was dishonored by Dushyasan and Duryodhan? And that would have been enough for Arjuna to be incited. But Krishna did not do that. And in fact, Krishna doesn't even call for revenge. Krishna's call in the Bhagavad Gita is not so much to fight as to establish Dharma. And the Kauravas are lawbreakers. Despite being in positions of law, they were so brazen that they were ready to dishonor an honorable lady in public. And there had to be assertive action to remove such people from power. Otherwise, they would wreak havoc in society. So, the Gita is a call for establishing Dharma. It is a call ultimately for spiritual wisdom, for spiritualization of consciousness. So, Krishna tells Arjuna to spiritualize his consciousness and act as an instrument of the divine. So, don't have personal agendas. Don't think of fighting to settle scores. That's not at all the message of the Gita. So, the Gita is not a book of silence. Oh, things are going in the wrong in the world, just keep silent. Nor is the Gita a book of violence, just fight. The Gita is a book of transcendence. Understand who you are, get a spiritual vision of life, and act with that transcendental consciousness. So now I don't want to go into the technicalities of the Gita, but I'm just giving this as an example of intellectual apathy. Now, generally whenever articles are written, especially if you read them on the net, you can see the comments below them. And there was quite a healthy debate going on over there below the article. And I found that there are more than Indians, or we could say Indian born, you could make it out from the names. There are non-Indians who had benefited from the Gita and they were defending the Gita. No, I have read the Gita, and there were so many Americans, Europeans, Mexicans, you can make out from the names, and they were defending. Like, no, the Gita is, I have got so much spiritual wisdom from the Gita. Gita is not a book of violence. So it's unfortunate that sacred icons of our tradition are often misrepresented, vilified, and sometimes we don't do much about it. There's an international journal for Hindu studies, and there are hardly any Hindus in that. There are Western scholars doing scholarship on Hinduism, and they often end up misrepresenting because they misunderstand. Either not always because they are malevolent, but sometimes they are just misinformed. So now, when there are some attacks on Indian culture, again, I'm talking about a pendulum over here. We can have two extremes in responding. One can be just violent condemnation, where we become activists, not just activists but violent. We go and destroy that person's, burn that person's effigy, or if some book contains something wrong, we go and burn those books. And this kind of reaction only ends up making people, making the mainstream media brand us as fanatics. So, and that is unfortunate. And a few people go to this extreme, and most people stay at the other extreme, that is apathetic inattention. I don't care about it. But in between, we can have a rational response, a rational refutation. This is how you are portraying it. It's not right. It's wrong. There were two movies in Bollywood about a few years ago. One was OMG, and then there was PK. And they were satires on Indian religious systems. So at that time, I had responded to those two movies by writing small booklets, OMG re-answering the questions, and GK for PK. So GK for PK was, GK is general knowledge, God knowledge, and Gita knowledge. So we can give rational refutations. If we have understood the tradition, if we have understood the culture, especially if we understood the philosophy, then we don't have to become violent, we don't have to stay silent. We can actually rationally present the traditions and the culture's value and perspective. So this also will require education. So we can use our independence to aspire for social influence. Not just I want to excel in my profession, in my life, but we also want to influence how people perceive us, and how people perceive our culture, our tradition. That's the second part. Now, I go to third part. How to understand India. The third part is seek spiritual India, not just ritual India. So what do I mean by spiritual versus ritual? So here you will see a 4-quadrant diagram, and this is about spirituality, philosophy, and religion. So religion is on the x-axis, spirituality is on the y-axis, and if there is no religion and there is no spirituality, that person is materialistic and ignorant. If there is only the religion but there is not much philosophy, by philosophy I refer to the rationale for understanding the reality of life, realities of life, how things are and how we need to act. So then it becomes sentimental, and then it becomes a ritual. Why do I do this? Because that's what I have been told to do. That's what we do in our culture. No, why? So then the religion aspect is there, but the philosophy is not there, then that becomes sentimental or ritual. Sometimes the philosophy aspect might be there, but the religion might not be there. Then it just becomes abstract, academic, irrelevant. So Srila Prabhupada would say that religion without philosophy is sentimental or fanatical, and philosophy without religion is sometimes just speculative. It's just mental speculation. But when there is religion and philosophy together, philosophy gives us the understanding of how things are, and religion helps us to practice it. Then it becomes authentically spiritual. So Many of us are born in India, and we practice certain things because of the culture that we are a part of, but we may not know why we are doing it. So we may either fall in the second category, in the quadrant 2, and from quadrant 2 we might just go to quadrant 1, where we just reject the whole culture. Many Western people who are interested in India, if they don't have experience of India, then they are in quadrant 3. So they may write about Indian traditions, but they are writing it from a very theoretical perspective. But the fourth is where we investigate to understand what we are doing. Then we can make a significant difference. So now what difference can we make? So spirituality as presented in the Indian tradition is actually a higher dimensional science. A higher dimensional science means that it's less like in science we have theory and experiment. So in spirituality we have philosophy and religion. So philosophy, like the theory in science, gives us postulates about the nature of reality, and religion in the sense is used in the sense of the practices that we do by which we can realize what the philosophy is teaching. Pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam. The Bhagavad Gita in 9.2 says that whatever it is teaching, one can realize it through experience. So the dharmic spirituality that is given in the Indian tradition, the yogic spirituality, it is eminently experiential. Modern science is experimental, yogic spirituality is experiential. We can have inner experience of higher realities. We can have inner experience of deeper fulfillment, deeper connection, deeper joy. And what happens by this? Now, millions of people all over the world are turning towards Indian spirituality, and they're not turning to it because of because that's what their parents taught. In fact, nobody, their parents or their culture didn't teach them at all. Their parents didn't teach them yoga. Their parents didn't teach them kirtans. But yoga and kirtan are hugely popular. Why? Because there is experiential benefit. In fact, there are other religious traditions who have now that there's something called Christian yoga. Now, there is no yoga in Christianity, but somehow because yoga is popular and they feel that because of yoga, people may go towards India and start exploring India's spiritual traditions. They don't want that. They say, we will teach you Christian yoga. And they create some images of Jesus sitting in meditation. Jesus is also doing yoga. Well, yes, or we can say at one level all spiritual teachers are yogis. But the point is that Indian spirituality is not just about, say, doing some rituals. It is about getting some experiences. That's why we might, when we grow up, we might just see the rituals. Okay, go to the temple, do this puja and do this, don't do this. But there is so much more. There is actually an opportunity to experience higher realities, to experience a deeper purpose to life, to experience a greater joy and connection in life. When we have this philosophical understanding, then we start seeing the rules differently. We start seeing the rules as routes to a better life. When somebody is saying do this and don't do this, we say why? So imagine if we are in a mountainous area where there is a mist in front of us and we can't see properly, and somebody says go here because this is a straight road. If you go there, you will you will fall off the cliff. You'll fall into deep valley. Oh, okay, then I'll go this way. So philosophy helps us to see that the various rules that are given, they are routes to a better life. They are not restrictors to an enjoyable life. Going back to the example of vegetarianism, that the rules are routes to a better life. They're not restrictors. So because by how a better life, we are healthier. We contribute more to the ecology. So it's a better life. There is tasty food available, even in vegetarian food. In fact, vegetarian cuisine is becoming extremely popular in the West because you can get much deeper refined tastes. When people eat meat, most of the taste actually comes from the spices, not so much from the meat itself. Many fruits, vegetables they have their natural taste, they can be eaten raw. But How many people can eat meat raw? Actually, so there is, when there are certain restrictions, they are actually, not all restrictions, but the restrictions that are given in the culture, in the tradition, we don't have to see them as restrictions. They are like rules, they are rules which are routes to a better life. When we see them that way, then we follow them because we understand this will take me to a better place in life. And this is where we can bring our talk to a circle and talk about inner independence. Inner independence means that we have got political independence now. Nobody is ruling, no foreign power is ruling India now. But we need to become independent internally. What does it mean? For understanding this, we have to see freedom holistically. Freedom is not just freedom for, it is also freedom from. What do I mean freedom for and freedom from? See, freedom from means, imagine somebody who is an addict. Now the addict, are they free? That if somebody is an alcoholic, they may fly from India to America, they may fly from Australia to UK, practically other sides of the globe. But as soon as they land there, or even when they are in the flight, they will be restless till they get a drink. So there are invisible ropes that are dragging them from where they are to the object that they are addicted to. And suppose somebody is an alcoholic, they become free from alcoholism, or take a drug addiction or whatever it is. Then that's freedom from, and that's empowering. It is immensely empowering. So we all have so many cravings. I need to maybe watch this TV program. I need to do this. There's so many things which if we don't do, we become so restless. So if we could become free from those cravings, we could do so much more in our lives. And unfortunately, if we indiscriminately adopt the materialistic culture that is being exported from the West to India, then we end up being shackled. We end up being shackled by greed, we end up being shackled by lust, we end up addicted. And spiritual growth, learning about our spiritual tradition, and not just learning about it, but experiencing it, finding higher purpose and joy in life that can free us from these lower cravings. In fact, millions of people across the world, by practicing bhakti spirituality as taught in the Bhagavad Gita, have become internally empowered, and they gave up all bad habits. Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, when he went to the West, there were people who were hippies, they were completely many of them were completely hooked to drugs. And Prabhupada gave them bhakti spirituality through the Hare Krishna Kirtan, and they got such taste that they just broke free from it. It was such a remarkable social phenomena that at that time the American government appreciated that we are not able to so easily get people off drugs, but Swami, you have been able to do it. So we focus too much on freedom for, I want to do this, who are you to stop me from doing it? Stopping me from doing it. But sometimes stopping us from doing that thing may free our life for a higher purpose, may free our mind from unnecessary cravings. And then we will be so much available for doing more valuable things in our life. So spirituality offers us inner independence by freeing us from self-defeating cravings. And in this way, I'll conclude with a few slides that we can have an east-west synthesis for all-round development. How is that? Now technology can make things better. We can have sturdier houses, better fans, smarter gadgets, and this technology is of course being developed all over the world now, but we could say that technological development was pioneered in the West, so technology comes from the West. Technology can make things better, spirituality can make people better. People better in the sense that it can free us from our lower cravings, give us a higher meaning and purpose in our lives, and in that way help us become better. And together, if you can bring technology and spirituality together, they can help us make the world better. So, and Indians, especially modern educated Indians, have the opportunity to be at the cutting edge in bringing about the synthesis. Because we live in a world of technology. Many of us are educated in fields related with technology, but we are recipients of the spiritual culture of India. So if we understand intellectually the spiritual culture, then each of us in our lives individually as well as in our social circles collectively, we can bring about the East-West synthesis for all-round development of humanity. You know, spiritual empowerment is something which we all can experience. If now you can think of the things that distract you, say maybe spending too much time on social media or watching too much entertainment stuff on YouTube or Netflix or wherever else. If we cut down on some of that time that we waste, if we pull ourselves together, and we all can do more good than what we are doing. And spirituality can help us to pull ourselves together. And we can focus on a higher purpose. We can do so much more good than what we are doing right now. You know, all of you are young, all of you have a future ahead of you. And if you let spirituality empower you, you can do so much more. And how much more can you do? Discovering how much good we can do can be our life's greatest adventure. Our life's greatest adventure. So, take initiative. Education is the key. That, you know, sometimes we think that for our culture, and we'll just wait for some charismatic gurus to emerge and they will spiritualize everyone. No, the Bhagavad Gita tells us every one of us can take responsibility, every one of us can become leaders. Now, you can focus on learning, practicing and sharing. Don't wait for some charismatic teachers to do that. In fact, if you do it, that will have far greater authenticity. If some guru is doing it, some people might say that's just their job, that's what they're going to do. But if you have your own career, you have your own life, and then you have spirituality in your life, and you share it, then you will have in some ways greater authenticity, because you are living in the world and you are doing this because it's your passion. It's something which has worked for you. You want to share it. So when Srila Prabhupada started the Krishna consciousness movement, he stressed a lot on education. He wanted the temples not to be just the centers of devotional culture, but he also wanted them to be the centers of philosophical education. There are regular talks that happens and questions that are answered. In fact, when I was introduced to Bhakti, for the first several weeks, I had hundreds of questions. And my guide is very patiently answered my questions. I try to do that in the same way now. On my website, I have answered almost 6,000 questions. I have written a few books of question answers. So, education is the key. And you can become empowered. And the Indian spirituality is all about inside out change. Everyone wants change, but no one wants to change. We think that, oh, let somebody else be the shaper of the change. But you can change that right now. By opening yourself to the spiritual wisdom of India, you can become internally empowered, you can change yourself, and you can become a change agent for the country and even the world at large. So I'll summarize what I spoke today, and then we can have a few questions. I spoke today on the topic of East-West synthesis, the role of youth in independent India. So I started with the irony, why are Indians respected in the West, outside India, but India itself is not respected so much? That is because Indians have not taken initiative to explain India, and that's because we ourselves don't know India. So what do we mean by India? India's uniqueness in the world comes from its Sanatan Dharma. And I talked about, to understand and make India understandable, three things: inspect, and you can become IAS, inspect, aspire and seek. investigate your spiritual culture, don't just reject it. We discussed unfortunately how rejection of vegetarianism as cool to become modern, and then people become modern and then they go to the West and they find actually becoming vegetarian is cool, not rejecting vegetarianism. So rejection can lead to nihilistic chaos when all authority is rejected. So we talked about the pendulum and the balance. Don't reject everything indiscriminately. Don't accept everything blindly. Have rather a rational evaluation of things. Ask questions and we can get answers. Then I talked about aspire. Indians, they aspire in fields of individual excellence, but unfortunately not so much in fields where there is social influence. We don't affect so much we don't worry so much or affect so much how people perceive us, and that's largely because of a colonial hangover, wherein people could strive to take care of themselves and their families, but didn't have much scope to influence the larger society, which was ruled by invaders. So that so we can change that. Unfortunately, this is especially seen in the intellectual apathy when things sacred to us are criticized. People don't come up to defend, and the few who come to defend, they become violent, and others just stay negligent. But we could again have a rational understanding and a rational response to things. Then I talked about, so this was aspire for social influence, and third was S, was seek spiritual India, not just ritual India. So I talked about the 4-quadrant diagram, that if there is no religion and no philosophy, then it's materialistic and ignorant. If there is only religion but no philosophy, then it is sentimental ritual. If there is only philosophy and no religion, then there is that's simply academic and theoretical, irrelevant. It's academically irrelevant. But then when there is religion and spirituality together, both, then it is authentically spiritual and transformational. So spirituality is like a higher dimensional science. Just as philosophy, that says there is theory and experiment in science, there is philosophy and religion and spirituality. And together, they can empower us, they can give us higher experiences, higher joys, and thereby it can give us inner freedom. Not just freedom for, but freedom from self-defeating cravings. And if we can become free from those cravings, then we can bring about an east-west synthesis. Technology can make things better, spirituality can make people better. And each one of us can become an agent of change and make not only our own lives better, but our nation and our world better. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much Chaitanya Charan Prabhu for a wonderful class, enlightening lecture, and now the much awaited time for questions and answers. We already received many questions down the line during lectures, so Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, please take it ahead. We will ask all the audience, those who are interested in asking questions, please kindly post your questions on the Facebook page and also on the YouTube. Meanwhile, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, please take it ahead, all the questions are there for you. Pick up whatever you want to choose and please answer them. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
So the question is, you mentioned that Indians are more respected in India. I thought it was the opposite, that India is widely respected as the land of spirituality, of yoga, of Buddha, but Indians are not respected because Indians often seem somewhat materialistic, and they sometimes try to exploit Indian Western people, spiritual seekers who come to India. Yes, that's also true. The world is a big place and there are different people who have different experiences. I was talking more about, say, my experiences of how Indians are perceived in the West by general Western people or by the mainstream Western media. Like the Indian mainstream media is not particularly concerned with India's spirituality. Similarly, the Western mainstream media is not concerned about India's spirituality. So, and just like in India, it's a fairly religious culture, but still the number of people who are spiritual are relatively few. So similarly in the West, the number of people who are spiritual are not huge. So among those people who are spiritual seekers, yes, India is widely respected. In fact, India is seen as a land of endless fascination and discovery, where often they come for tourism, and they come, there are some who come and look at the Taj Mahal, but there are many who come to go to Rishikesh and other places where they are seeking some spiritual experiences, some spiritual wisdom. So for those who come like that, for them India is very much a place to be respected. They are fascinated by it. But then they are often appalled, distressed when they see that, if they are introduced to India through some spiritual wisdom texts. Say they read the Upanishads, they read the Gita, they may read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. They feel fascinated to want to find the land that they find the land where all this wisdom came from, and they are often dismayed when they see how disorderly, how chaotic, how poverty stricken, and sometimes how apathetic Indians are to their material situation. So, and on top of that, at one side their people are disorderly, another side they come as spiritual seekers to the land of India, but often many of the places where people come for spiritual seeking, they have unfortunately become hubs of spiritual tourism, and that has led to material commercialism. So often there are hawkers of spiritual wares who are themselves not very spiritual. So encountering both the disorderliness of mainstream India and even the materialism that is often at first seen when people come to even spiritual places in India, that can put off many people. And often the spiritual tourists to India, spiritual seekers to India, they have to pass through both these barriers to find out, to encounter the really spiritual people who are there in India. And then when they encounter them, then they can appreciate. So I would say for people who are seriously spiritual, then India is respected, and Indians are not respected that much. But for the mainstream media and mainstream people in the West, it is the opposite. That Indians are more respected for their professionalism, their law-abiding, upstanding behavior, and somehow India is seen as a primitive land. Thank you. Okay, and now much of the misconceptions about our tradition comes from academia. So how can we counter the misconceptions of our tradition coming from the academia, and should we all be becoming intellectual Kshatriyas for this purpose? Well, there are two different questions related, but first of all, yes, it is very true that academic studies are one of the most corrosive influences on the mainstream perceptions of Sanatana Dharma. What happened was, if you look at it, traditionally when the British came to India, at that time they realized that they couldn't rule India by force for very long, and they were very small in number, and they were not really very interested in living in India because they felt India was too hot and too many diseases. So often the British who came to India, they considered their Indian posting to be like a punishment, and they wanted to go back as soon as possible. Of course, go back after looting a lot of Indian wealth. But so they realized that they need the cooperation of Indians to rule. And therefore, they decided that the way we will get the cooperation is if Indians voluntarily become intellectually submissive to us. And therefore, they had some of their scholars study our traditions extensively and study them in a way that was superficially appreciative but substantially subversive. Subversive means damaging the faith. So Max Muller, for example, even in India many places there is Max Muller Bhavan, because he is considered the doyen, the pioneer of the study of Indology. But Max Muller has written in his letters to his wife that he had a clear agenda to Christianize India, and he said the only way we can Christianize is by showing Indians how foolish and irrational and primitive their beliefs are. So he interpreted the text with that agenda, and in that sense there were previous Islamic invaders who destroyed temples, but quite often these Indological scholars were deputed by the British, they were paid by the British, they destroyed the faith that made people go to the temples. So in fact they would have competitions among the scholars, like essay writing competition we have. There was an essay writing competition among the scholars in Britain, that the best refutation of the Hindu religious system. So of course today's academia is not that biased, but somehow Max Muller's and the other scholars at this time, their readings are considered as definitive, and a subsequent scholarship is built on that. Some of them they try to correct what he has said, but that whole attitude of subversiveness as contrasted with sympathetic attitude, that is something which is very much there. And unfortunately Indians themselves, as I said earlier, they chose more careers in the STEM fields, not so much careers in the field of humanities, and there are not many Indian scholars who are grounded in Indian culture and Indian tradition, Indian scholars on Hinduism. So because of that, the mainstream academia is often, it brings out works that are quite critical, and there is no wrong in rational criticism, but often that when there is criticism that misrepresents, that cherry picks, that maligns without giving the other side a fair hearing, then that is a serious problem. So what can so now the academia, for example, it doesn't affect people much in India. Say if somebody wants to know what is Diwali in India, well, they have experienced Diwali, they can experience Diwali next time when it comes. But for somebody in the West, when they want to know what is Diwali, they are going to look in Wikipedia or some other encyclopedia for it. They are going to Google it, and when they Google it, then quite often the sources, the academics, the sources of these encyclopedias, they often are written by academic scholars, and often they have a distorted perception. So now if you compare, say, at least some of the pages representing Hindu festivals are reasonably good, but still if you consider the pages for the characters of the Ramayana and compare the pages for the characters of the Bible, then the characters of the Bible are much better described. So in Wikipedia also. So basically now Wikipedia is an encyclopedia that can be edited by anyone, although they have to conform to academic standards. But so there are two ways to counter the intellectual misconceptions that come from the academia. One is enter into the academia ourselves and present the traditionalist perspective. We have to do it rationally, we have to do it humbly, we cannot just say that they are wrong, we have to engage with their present conceptions and then expand their understanding. That requires a lot of work. Sometimes it requires decades of study, and sometimes it requires generations to change the perspective, so change the narrative, but that is hard work which is needed. Another could be that the academia is one way of influencing the media and the public, but to some extent social media has democratized things to significant extent. So we could avoid the academia and reach people in general directly through online outreach, for example. So if we can study ourselves properly and then present either through videos, through books, through documentaries, to videos. Now, the modern India's understanding of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata have been shaped much more by the TV serials Ramayana and the Mahabharata than they are shaped by, say, any academically written books about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. That is not the case in the West. Now, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they were overall written or done with a somewhat devotional, or at least appreciative disposition. So, we could see what are the ways in which we can contribute to influencing society's perceptions. And intellectual Kshatriyas, it's quite a attractive and somewhat provocative phrase. What it means is that we need to be equipped and we need to be ready to fight. We need to be intelligent, we need to be intellectually equipped, and we should be ready to fight. Well, we can fight, we can but confront, but not necessarily in a confrontational way. But we don't have to demonize those who are criticizing. We can contextualize their actions. Okay, they are doing this because they come from this background. And when we start attacking people, ad hominem attacks, that this person is a terrible person, that quite often comes off as fanatical. But if you can objectively, okay, this is what is the argument, this is what the response for, this is the argument, this is the response for it. Then, so if we can do that kind of work, where we counter the misconceptions rationally and objectively, then yes, that kind of intellectual Kshatriya work can be invaluable in sharing, in raising awareness and sharing India's spiritual treasure. In fact, we could say that Srila Prabhupada, he did that through his books. So in the modern times, Srila Prabhupada was one of the most prominent intellectual Kshatriyas. And we can learn from our spiritual teachers, and we can become representative, we can become intellectual Kshatriyas in our own domain. So the point is not to so much become intellectual or to become Kshatriyas. The point is, first we need to spiritualize our consciousness. Now, we don't want to, as Einstein said, problems cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness that created them. So, oh, you are wrong and I am right. And they will feel that you are wrong and I am right. And that just goes on and on. We need to raise our consciousness. We need to become spiritual, become more spiritual, and then bring our spirituality in both the intellectual understanding that we share and the mode in which we share that understanding. That way, we can have effect that will be more uplifting and not more polarizing. Thank you. So, criticism of Islam is often in the mainstream media called as Islamophobia, and that is suppressed not only by Islamic extremists, by their violent reaction to it, but even in the mainstream media by calling it Islamophobia. So, can we also point out how criticism of Hinduism is Hinduphobia, and that way we can counter it? Well, it depends. There are a lot of complex socio-political factors that go into particular intellectual trends. So somehow what has happened is that there is the leftist perspective on things, and the idea is anybody who is in authority, anybody who is in a position of influence, anybody who is in majority, they are considered to be bad people, and those who are minority, they are considered to be victimized. So it is in today's world, especially in the leftist narrative, the victims are virtuous. So those who are in minority, those who are disempowered, they are virtuous, and those who are in power, they are considered to be vicious. They are considered to be the bad people. And how do you define somebody who is in power? Those who are in numerical majority, those who are more wealthy, even those who are more educated. So somehow in India, because Hindus are in majority, so it is presumed that whenever there are any conflicts, Hindus must be causing it, because they are majority and they are suppressing the minorities. And that's why But now if you go to consider Islam, Islam is majority in some parts of the world, and there other religious practices are extremely restricted. But especially in the Western world, because Islam is in minority, and there if any criticism of Islam is done, that is portrayed as Islamophobia. And that is also because Muslim scholars have done a lot of work in trying to differentiate between, say, Islam and Islamic extremism. And somehow we could say Hindu scholars have not done that. If we consider the historical track record, we can't say that any religion is stain free. Every religion has been abused for people's personal agendas and has been used to cause violence. But historically speaking, the dharmic religions, the violence instigated by them is far, far less than what has been instigated in the Abrahamic religions. So Abrahamic religions are primarily in this context Christianity, Islam. The dharmic religions are Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Sikhism. So although historically speaking the violence is far, far less in the dharmic religions, somehow because Hindus are in majority in India, so the term Hindu phobia is not considered as valid because you are in majority. What do you have to be afraid of? It is rather we have to be afraid of you because you are in majority. But actually Indian culture has been most inclusive. When the Jews were persecuted in the Middle East, the Jews were given shelter in India. When Islam started spreading and Parsis were persecuted, they came to India and they are still living in India and they are flourishing. So even when the Roman Empire started, Christians were persecuted. When Christianity started and the Romans were persecuting Christian Empire, persecuting Christians, many Christians came to India and they were sheltered over here. So India has a vibrant tradition of inclusiveness and tolerance, and that comes from its Sanatan Dharma, which understands that one truth can be known by different names, that there are many paths to the absolute truth. Ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. So unfortunately, there is not so much awareness of this, and stray incidents of violence are directly imputed on the religion and it's considered as extremist. So for us to portray ourselves as victims will be difficult, and in that sense whether the term Hindu phobia can gain circulation or not, that will vary. It is possible that it may not gain circulation because, as I said, we are the majority, and in the West we may not be the majority, we are minorities, but then we are influential minorities. So we are wealthy minorities, educated minorities. So the idea that we are victims doesn't come off very easily for people to believe. So I feel more of intellectual awareness being created so that the traditions tradition is presented in a intellectually acceptable and respectable way. That would be a healthier way to take things forward in terms of correcting perceptions and changing the narrative. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So the question is, I said that we can inquire, but what are the sources where we can inquire to understand about our culture? Well, most fundamentally, the culture is drawn from our wisdom texts. There's the Bhagavad Gita, there is the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Upanishads. So our inquiries, wherever we go, they need to be grounded in these wisdom texts. These wisdom texts are our primary philosophical foundation. And then we can look at teachers who are teaching us these wisdom texts. Even before I was introduced to Krishna consciousness, I read the books of many spiritual teachers, and I found almost all those books valuable, inspiring, but I found also that most of those spiritual teachers would not quote much from the spiritual texts. So when I read the books of Srila Prabhupada, I found that Prabhupada would quote extensively from spiritual texts, and I felt that what he was speaking was grounded in scripture. Now there are many spiritual teachers who may be personally inspiring because of their personality, their charisma, maybe even their spirituality, but how much are they teaching how much are they representing the spiritual traditions, the spiritual texts, that may be open to question. So we can learn from, there are many spiritual teachers today, and in a sense we live in a democracy, we can learn from anyone. However, if we want to learn about our tradition, it's important to learn from those who are grounding their understanding in the tradition. So that's why if we focus our learning on the wisdom texts and look for sources where those wisdom texts are being taught properly and learn from there, that would be most helpful. That will help us to gain understanding in a way that is grounded in the tradition. We don't just want just things that are logical and make sense, but they are completely disconnected, or they are only remotely connected with the way things were in the tradition. So that would be a broad understanding. Thank you. So there's another question. There are many, how can we Indians have social influence? There are many Indians who are already in positions of social influence, but they don't care much about their culture, and they don't care for either understanding or sharing their culture. Yes, that's true. I feel there are two reasons for this. That at one level, the way our culture is portrayed in the media and in the mainstream culture at large, in the mainstream cultural media at large, that is quite negative, and that deters any kind of inquiry about it. Okay, this must be so old, primitive, why bother to inquire about it? And within our intellectual studies, because most Indians go often in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, that kind of fields, so, or medicine, math, medicine, whatever. Now when we do that, then the study area doesn't intersect with any cultural study. So that's why many Indians, they may grow up to become very influential, but they have never had any authentic intellectual experience about Indian culture and Indian tradition and Indian spirituality. They may have had some personal experiences with some teachers, which some might be good, some might be bad. They have of course seen some culture, some of them might liked it, some of them may not like it. But the intellectual side of the tradition has not been known at all. So that's why Indians who are in positions of influence, they may not use their positions in any way to influence others positively. So that's why again education is the key. We rather than lamenting that somebody in influence is not doing much, we can start with what can I do? Maybe I can first connect myself with the intellectual depth of the spiritual traditions of India and learn more and more about it, and then in future in life and society as I grow, I may have more influence, or even whatever little influence I have, I can use it to share my spirituality with others. There's one more challenge for this is, because we live in a secular country, so often we try to separate our religion and our that side from our professional side. And we say sometimes, yeah, now secularism, if it means equality toward all religions, if it means impartiality toward religion, all religions, then in that sense secularism is good. It's good in the sense that we live in a multi-faith environment, we have multiple religions. So yeah, the government needn't favor one particular religion. But unfortunately, in the name of secularism, we have ended up putting all the venerable tradition of India into the box of, say, Hinduism, and we are rejecting that. No, we don't want to study this. There are, say, in the Western world, at least till a few decades before, the Bible was studied not just as a religious book, but also as a part of the literary heritage of the West. So unfortunately in India, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, if they were preserved, They were preserved because within the families, these books would be referred to, the stories would be told, the morals would be given. But unfortunately, in the name of being religiously, of secular, we have trained generations to be religiously ignorant. Not religiously impartial, but religiously ignorant. So, secularism shouldn't become a code word for atheism or nihilism, where we just reject all traditions or everything traditional in the name of sectarianism. So, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, they are India's national heritage, and they could be studied as books of wisdom, as books of cultural influence. And we may not, within the mainstream academic educational system, we may not study them as books of devotion. That can be done in places of devotional learning, but we could use our influence in whatever small ways we have to incorporate this kind of, at least at a supplementary level, learning about our own tradition, our own culture. So just we don't have to be so afraid of asserting our cultural identity, our spiritual side. It's only when we start imposing our spiritual side on others, then people start feeling threatened. But if we say, this is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. This is what I practice, and this is why I practice it. This is what I have experienced. Then no one can argue with that. Now, our experience is ours, and nobody can argue with that. It's only when we start saying, you should do this, well, then that becomes a problem. So there was a few years ago some national discussion, should the Bhagavad Gita be made the national book of India? So I had opportunity to speak on various occasions at that time. So I said that, what do we mean by the national book? Do we want to impose it on everyone, that everybody has to learn it? Well, that would be problematic. But rather than imposing the Bhagavad Gita as a national book, if we see, yes, look at the books that have had huge influence in Indian society. And it's not that, say, if we make, say for example, the tiger the national animal of India, that doesn't mean we are going on a mission on killing all other animals. If we make, say, the peacock the national bird of India, or whatever, that doesn't mean that we are going to destroy or annihilate all the other birds. No, this is special. So we could look at what is special about Indian culture and acknowledge that and appreciate that, relish that, share that, without necessarily demeaning anything else. So if we can do it in a balanced way, then whatever positions of influence we have, we can use that to share spirituality with others. And we will have to individually see where we can share the influence. But over a period of time, we all can, if we just have that desire, we will be given the guidance. Dadami buddhi yogam tam. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I will give you the intelligence from within. If you have the desire to do seva, if you have the desire to do something good in a mood of service and contribution, then I will give you the intelligence about how to do that and how to grow through doing that. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, for your wonderful association in the form of your wonderful talk. And we thank all the audience here for participating very enthusiastically for this 175th Prerana Festival. We are still going online, we are not able to meet. Hopefully, we'll able to meet soon. Meanwhile, something special is going to happen in September for the next Prerana. Keep in touch and we'll keep you posted for the 176th Prerana in progress coming in September. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Om Jnana Timiran.